About 6 months ago, I was discussing how amazing it was that the Pokemon anime was still running after all these years with a friend of mine. Although I still try to catch it every weekend, this friend has ceased watching back in one of the Johto seasons due to finding the series repetitive. The final straw though, he said, elaborating on why he no longer watched the series, was that the episode was basically a snuff film. Understandably, I scoffed at this premise. You can't seriously tell me they released a Pokemon snuff cartoon. Well, you're wrong. He went on to explain that a lost episode was not too far off a stretch of imagination, seeing as how there are already several episodes that have been given that title. He said it was the sickest thing he'd ever seen, and that it gave him nightmares for a long time. He refused to share the content of the episode, but instead offering the VHS he had somewhere in the back of his closet, claiming that I wouldn't believe him unless I saw it myself. I had heard about other popular cartoons having legendary unaired episodes that were reportedly uncharacteristically disturbing, such as Suicide Mouse and Dead Bart. However, the only evidence of those ever existing were poorly made YouTube videos by fans of the stories. I figured this was simply Pokemon's version of such. About a month and a half went by before I saw this friend again. True to his word, he delivered the videotape, but promptly left, not wishing to stick around for the viewing. Looking the tape over, I noticed something strange, save for the fact that it was unlabeled. Already I was getting the chills, having learnt the potential horrors of an unmasked videocassette from The Ring. I decided to press on and watch it anyway. After all, what was the worst that could happen? Some amateur production of Ash screaming and his face melting? I inserted the tape into my VCR and it started right up like most store-bought shows and films would. Initially I thought perhaps this was just a standard Pokemon VHS with the label removed. Immediately though, I knew it was something different, when a grainy Japanese title appeared on the screen. The quality was terrible, like the millionth generation fan subs of Pokemon Z that I had seen as a youth. There was no opening theme, just this screen with barely legible hiragana. What I believe to be Meowth's voice actor shouted the title. My Japanese is very rusty, and the sound quality was lousy, so the only word I caught was possibly Kahiro. After a few seconds, the title vanished and was replaced by an extreme close-up of Ash's face sideways. In what I had believed to be a result of trashy video quality, it looked like Ash's eyes were wide open, yet completely blank. I soon realized that they may have been blank when, as the focus slowly zoomed out from his face, it was clear. There was a trickle of blood emerging from his right temple. I cocked an eyebrow in confusion. The scene changed to that of James. A sinister grin was on his face, or at least what I thought could have been, considering that the fact that the video quality was so terrible that I couldn't be sure if it was making out all the details correctly. What was perfectly clear was that he held a pistol in his hand. James said something that sounded like he was gloating. Again, because of my poor knowledge of anything outside of basic Japanese and the abysmal sound quality, I wasn't able to make out anything he said, but the voice actor sounded entirely different. More of a deep voice, uncannily like Yasunori Masutani's fused villain in the Dragon Ball animated special Asu, Son Goku and his friends return. There was another shot of Ash's body, and it was definite that he had been shot in the head. The blood had stopped actively trickling, but it was apparent that it had pooled underneath him. Although the video quality made it tough to tell, it appeared as if the animation was on par with the rest of the series during the first season. If this was indeed a fake, it was a darn good one. The focus switched back to James, who had started some sort of wicked-sounding monologue. Jessie and Meowth emerged from the bushes after about 40 seconds. They took a look at Ash's corpse and started speaking simultaneously in rapid, panicked voices. James interrupted them with a laugh, putting his hand on his hip. He started to gloat again. His chest puffed out with pride. Jesse started screaming at him. I caught Rocketo Dan, Team Rocket, and Janat Desu. It is not, but that was all. The scene then focused on an enraged James' face. The detail was still horrid, but it was clear that James was pissed. The focus zoomed out as he pointed the gun off-screen to the left, shouting, Shanae, 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 Shanae. In essence, telling them to die. A clear-as-day gunshot echoed from the speakers, and Jessie took a bullet to the forehead. She stood, looking upward, as if trying to see the wound, as a spurt of blood sprayed from the bullet hole. She slowly collapsed to her knees, fell face first to the ground. Meowth yelled something, and protracted his claws, leaping through the air with speed lines in the background. He was stopped short by a bullet to the abdomen. Meowth catapulted backwards as blood trickled from the wound. James laughed in triumph and ran off through a clearing in the forest. At this point I began to wonder that if this was indeed a legitimate production from the anime studio, what sort of sick minds would develop such a thing? At the very least, it was apparent that the roles of Jessie and Meowth were voiced by the usual seiyuu, which further complicated the matter. Why would they participate in such a production? The scene shifted to Ash again, and Pikachu approached the body. A happy shout of Pika-Pee was soon followed by several confused, repeated queries of Pika-Pee, Pika-Pee. It cut to a close-up of Pikachu's face as he realized what had happened. Tears streaming down his face, with a very depressed Pika-Pee, and then outright crying. I began crying too, feeling bad for this adorable fellow and a personal favorite character of mine, who had just lost his best friend. I tried drying my tears as the scene shifted back to James running through the forest. It appeared as if he had a wicked smirk on his face. I could hear his voice, which had kind of an echo to it, but since his mouth wasn't moving, I deducted that he was thinking something. A few seconds later, Pikachu's very enraged voice cut through. James looking startled, he slipped behind a tree, his back pressed against it. He continued thinking. His expression panicked for several seconds before an evil grin returned. Pikachu approached the tree, shouting angrily. James slipped out from behind the tree, pointing the gun at the mouse. No, I yelled. Don't hurt Pikachu. I wanted to grab the remote and shut off the tape, or at least the TV. Unfortunately, my hands felt like two cold stones at the end of my arms, and I don't think all of my willpower would have been able to move them. Likewise, I was unable to turn away. Before James could fire, however, Pikachu attacked with an electric attack, shouting in the same enraged voice he had been yelling at James with. The attack hit spot on, instead of the goofy zapping animation that one had come to expect from Pikachu's attacks. James's hair and clothes began to catch on fire as he screamed in the most inhumane scream I had ever heard. It didn't sound like any of the show's voice actors, including the new voice of James, but instead some sort of guttural yell of pain, like some sort of animal or demon. He began to zoom in on James as his hair began to thin from the fire, as his shirt had partially fallen off. His skin was charred and he began to drop to his knees. The fire then ceased, and all that was left of James as he fell to the ground was a bald, cooked corpse with half a shirt. Pikachu fired off 2 more electrical attacks, yelling through its tears. This served no effect on James other than causing him to flop a bit upon initial impact. I was surprised to see Misty run into the patch of forest where Pikachu was standing. She ran up to Pikachu and said something, wrapping her arms around the little yellow mouse. Both of them began sobbing heavily, and the scene ended with Pikachu's tear-streaked face in close-up. The cut to static startled me, especially since the entire production seemed to last naught but 8 minutes total. I fast-forwarded to see if there was anything after the static, but there was nothing. I shut off the video and rewound it, putting my head in my hands, trying to decompress. I'd definitely seen much worse than what had just occurred on screen. But the fact that it was Pokemon, a more or less wholesome show, made it so disturbing. What really got to me is seeing how sad Pikachu was. That, in and of itself, was depressing. About 10 minutes had passed before I decided to call the friend that lent me the tape. He refused to discuss the content, and the only question of mine he would answer was the origin of the tape. Apparently he had found it at random in a drawer of his, and had no idea how it appeared there. There was an awkward silence for about a minute after this before my friend spoke up again. You didn't happen to see what was at 2:16, did you? I replied with a negative, not recalling timestamps or anything that would have stood out. His response was, "Good. You don't want to." He then abruptly hung up. I knew that I should have heeded his warning, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped the tape on again and fast-forwarded it to about 2 minutes in. Watching closely, I could definitely see something flash on the screen very briefly that I'd missed before. Going back to the 2:10 mark, I advanced frame by frame until I came across the screen that he had likely been referring to. One that nearly forced me to change pants. It was some sort of bear-like creature with spiraling goat-like horns. It was like no Pokemon I'd ever seen, and strangely this frame was much clearer than the rest of the video. In that art style was vastly different, much more detailed and realistic, like a Alex Ross painting. The most terrifying part was that Brock was strung up on a tree across from the beast and was pulling his intestines from a large gash in his gut. I knew not what this scene was supposed to represent, or what this monstrosity that had disemboweled Brock was, but I immediately ejected the tape and took a lighter to it, setting it on fire and praying over it. After the tape had been melted sufficiently, I doused with holy water to put out the flame. After it had cooled off enough to handle, I threw it in an empty box I had lying around, and immediately ran outside to heave it into the trash.